I'll give you my bonus if you can read this, the CEO laughed, but the waitress silenced the room. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, have you ever been completely underestimated at work? And at the end of the story, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Enjoy. Arthur Pendleton viewed his company, a top-tier financial firm named Pendleton Securities, not as a workplace, but as a perfectly calibrated machine. He was the chief engineer, and emotions, mistakes, and inefficiencies were grit in the gears. At 45, he was a legend on Wall Street, a man who could dissect a market trend with surgical precision, but couldn't remember the name of the woman who brought him his coffee every morning for the past 3 years. To him, people were functions, assets, or liabilities. There was nothing in between. Clara Hayes, the woman who brought him his coffee, was, in his mind, a function. At 28, she was quiet, efficient, and had perfected the art of being invisible. She moved through the executive floor cafeteria like a ghost, refilling coffee pots, clearing tables, and never making eye contact. She wore the simple, gray uniform of the catering staff, a color that seemed designed to help her blend in with the cold granite walls of the office. But behind her quiet demeanor, Clara was a sponge. She listened to the snippets of conversation. She saw the frantic scribbles on whiteboards left in meeting rooms. She read the discarded financial papers left on tables. In 3 years, she had earned a phantom MBA in high-stakes finance, a degree no one knew she possessed. The crisis began on a cold Tuesday in October. A cryptic, encrypted message had arrived from a mysterious and highly sought-after European investor known only by the pseudonym Cyclops. Cyclops was a ghost in the financial world, a kingmaker who could make or break companies with a single investment. For months, Arthur had been trying to woo him, to convince him to invest $1 billion in a new green energy fund. This message was the first direct communication he had ever received. The problem? It was complete gibberish. The message was a single page of complex, interlocking symbols and patterns, a cipher that looked like something out of a spy movie. "What in God's name is this?" Arthur barked, throwing the paper onto the massive conference table. The room was filled with his best and brightest, a team of data analysts, cybersecurity experts, and seasoned financial strategists. For 2 hours, they had been trying to crack the code with absolutely no success. "It's not a standard encryption, sir," one of his lead analysts, a young man named Ben, said nervously. "It's not digital. It seems to be analog, a custom-made cipher." "A game," Arthur sneered. "The man is playing a game with $1 billion deal. Get it solved, now." The news of the Cyclops cipher spread through the office like wildfire. Executives huddled in corners, whispering theories. The atmosphere on the 50th floor was thick with a tension that was part panic, part intellectual frustration. Clara was clearing away the coffee cups from the disastrous meeting when she saw the paper, left discarded on the conference table. She glanced at it, her curiosity piqued. The symbols were strange, but they had a rhythm, a pattern. It wasn't just random, it was a language. Her mind, which found comfort in patterns and logic, began to turn the puzzle over and over. Later that afternoon, the frustration in the office had reached a boiling point. Arthur, who hated nothing more than a problem he couldn't solve, was storming through the main executive lounge, his face a thundercloud. He saw Clara at a small table on her break, a napkin in front of her. She wasn't eating. She was doodling, scribbling symbols on the cheap paper with a simple ballpoint pen. They were the same symbols from the cipher. Arthur stopped dead. The absurdity of the situation, the pressure of the day, and his own towering arrogance all coalesced into a single, cruel impulse. He snatched the cipher from a passing analyst's hand, strode over to Clara's table, and slammed it down in front of her. "Well, look what we have here," he announced, his voice loud enough for the entire lounge to hear. "Our waitress seems to think she's a code breaker." A few executives chuckled. Clara's face flushed a deep crimson. She quickly tried to hide her napkin. "Don't be shy," Arthur said with a mocking laugh. "You've been staring at this thing all day? You think you've got it figured out?" He looked around the room, playing to his audience. "I'll tell you what." He pointed at Clara, a cruel smirk on his face. I'll give you my entire annual bonus if you can read this. $1 million for our resident genius waitress. The room erupted in laughter. It was a joke, a brutal piece of corporate theater designed to humiliate her and release his own frustration. Clara felt a dozen pairs of eyes on her, some amused, some pitiful. She wanted to shrink, to disappear, to become the invisible woman she had been for 3 years. But then she thought of her grandmother, who had raised her with one core principle. Your dignity is the one thing no one can take from you unless you hand it to them. She took a deep breath. She looked at the arrogant, laughing man in front of her, the man who saw her as nothing more than a punchline. And she made a choice. She slowly pushed her doodled-on napkin to the side. She picked up the cipher. The room grew quiet, the laughter dying down as everyone waited to see what she would do. She studied the page for a long, silent minute. Her lips moved slightly, as if she were sounding out a forgotten language. Then she looked up, her gaze clear and steady, and met Arthur's mocking eyes. "It's a variation of a visionaire cipher," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with an unshakable confidence. "But the key isn't a word. It's a sequence based on the stock market closing prices of the top 5 tech companies from 1987, the year of the Black Monday crash." The silence in the room was now absolute. The executives stared at her, their smiles frozen on their faces. Arthur's smirk faltered. "He's not just testing your intelligence," Clara continued, her voice gaining strength, as she looked directly at Arthur. "He's testing your understanding of history. He's asking if you remember the past, if you've learned from its mistakes." She picked up her pen and started writing on the back of the cipher, her hand moving with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing. "The message isn't about the investment. It's a question." She finished writing and pushed the paper across the table to Arthur. His hands trembled slightly as he picked it up. He read her translation, his face growing paler with each word. The message read, "$1 billion is a tool. In the hands of a fool it builds a house of cards. Tell me, Mr. Pendleton, what have you built that will survive the next crash?" The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Arthur Pendleton, the king of Wall Street, had been publicly silenced. Not by a rival, not by a market downturn, but by the waitress who served him his coffee. He had made a bet, a cruel joke, to assert his power. He had no idea he was betting against the smartest person in the room. Arthur stood frozen, the translated message in his hand feeling as heavy as a block of lead. The faces of his top executives, who moments before had been laughing at his cruel joke, were now a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and a dawning, grudging respect for the woman who still stood before him. Clara didn't gloat. She didn't say, "I told you so." She simply met his stunned gaze, her expression calm and neutral. Then she picked up her tray of empty coffee cups, and with the same quiet dignity she always had, she turned and walked back towards the cafeteria, leaving a crater of silence in her wake. For the first time in his professional life, Arthur Pendleton had no idea what to do next. He spent the rest of the afternoon locked in his office. He didn't answer calls. He didn't respond to emails. He just sat at his massive desk, staring at the cipher and Clara's elegant, precise handwriting. He had built his empire on the ability to assess value. He could price a company, a stock, a merger, down to the last decimal point. But how did you put a value on this? On the kind of intelligence that saw not just numbers, but the history and the humanity behind them. His first call was to HR. "I want every piece of information we have on Clara Hayes," he commanded. "Education, work history, everything. And I want it in 5 minutes." The file was thin, almost insultingly so. It listed a community college enrollment in a liberal arts program which she never finished. Her work history was a string of service jobs, cashier, barista, and for the last 3 years, cafeteria waitress. There was nothing, absolutely nothing, to explain how she could have deciphered one of the most complex, custom-made ciphers his team had ever seen. It didn't make sense, and Arthur hated things that didn't make sense. That evening, he did something he hadn't done since he was a junior analyst. He did his own research. He didn't delegate it. He sat at his computer and he dug. He found her name on a list of winners of a national collegiate mathematics competition from 8 years ago. He found a scholarly article she had co-authored in an obscure cryptography journal on the topic of historical ciphers. The article was brilliant, dense, and far beyond his own understanding. The pieces started to come together, forming a picture of a mind that had been derailed, a genius that had been hidden in plain sight. The next morning he was waiting for her when she arrived for her shift. He found her in the deserted cafeteria, wiping down tables before the morning rush. "We need to talk," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. She continued wiping the table, not looking at him. "If this is about the bonus, you can keep it. I don't want it." "This isn't about the bonus," he said. "This is about you." He placed a copy of the cryptography article he had printed out on the table in front of her. Deconstructing the Unbreakable, a New Approach to Polyalphabetic Substitution Ciphers, by Professor Alastair Finch and Clara Hayes. She froze, her hand still on the table. She looked at the paper, then up at him, her eyes guarded. "I don't understand," he said, his voice full of a genuine confusion that was completely new to him. "You have a mind like this, and you're serving coffee?" She finally looked at him, and he saw a flash of old pain in her eyes. "Because minds like this don't pay for a sick mother's medical bills, Mr. Pendleton. A steady paycheck, even a small one, does." She told him the story then, in short, clipped sentences. The promising academic career, the scholarship to a prestigious university. The phone call that had changed everything, her mother's sudden debilitating illness. The decision to drop out of school to become her full-time caregiver. The mountain of medical debt, the service jobs. The years of putting her own dreams on hold because someone she loved needed her more. "I never stopped learning," she finished, her voice quiet but firm. "I just learned in the margins. In the library on my days off, in online forums late at night. You don't need a classroom to be curious." He listened, the last of his arrogant assumptions crumbling into dust. He had seen her as a function, an invisible part of his machine. He had never once considered the life she lived, the battles she fought, before she walked through his office doors every morning. "The cipher from Cyclops," he said, finally understanding. "It wasn't just a test of intelligence, it was a test of character. He wanted to see if we were a company that could recognize value in an unexpected place." He looked at her. "And we almost failed. I almost failed." He took a deep breath. This was it. The moment to pivot, to change the entire game. "I have a proposal for you, Clara," he said, his tone all business now, but a different kind of business. A real one. "I'm creating a new division at Pendleton Securities, a department of, let's call it qualitative analytics. It won't focus on numbers. It will focus on the stories behind the numbers, on history, on culture, on the human variables that the rest of Wall Street ignores. It will be our secret weapon." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "And I want you to run it." Clara stared at him, her face a mask of disbelief. "Run it? Arthur, I don't have a degree. I'm a waitress." "You are the most qualified person for the job," he said, with an unshakable certainty. "You have a salary, a team, complete autonomy. The only condition is that you report directly to me." She was silent for a long, long time. He could see the war in her eyes, the hope battling against a lifetime of being told she wasn't good enough. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally, her voice a whisper. "Is this pity?" "No," he said, his voice softening. "It's not pity, it's respect. And it's an apology for not seeing you sooner." He stood up to leave, to give her space to think. "The offer is on the table, Clara. The job is yours if you want it." He walked out of the cafeteria, leaving her alone with the smell of brewing coffee and the biggest, most terrifying opportunity of her life. He didn't know if she would accept. But he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he had just made the most important investment of his career. He wasn't just investing in a new division. He was investing in a person. And he had a feeling the returns would be beyond anything he could ever predict. Clara Hayes walked into the 50th floor of Pendleton Securities the next Monday, feeling like she had accidentally stepped into a parallel universe. Last week, she was wiping down tables in this same executive lounge. Today, she had an office with a view and an official title, Director of Qualitative Analytics, a department that until 72 hours ago hadn't existed. The employees treated her with a mixture of awe, suspicion, and outright confusion. They would see her walking down the hall, and a wave of whispers would follow her like the wake of a ship. She was the cipher, the waitress who humbled the king, a piece of living corporate folklore. Arthur, true to his word, had given her a team and a budget. Her team consisted of 3 young, brilliant but overlooked analysts from the lower floors, individuals he admitted he never would have noticed before. Clara didn't start by giving them orders. She started by bringing in donuts. "Okay, team," she said, opening the box in their new, sparsely furnished office. "Rule number 1 of the Qualitative Analytics Department: we do not start a revolution on an empty stomach. Rule number 2: there are no bad ideas, only ideas that haven't found their story yet." Her approach to management was as unconventional as she was. She didn't hold formal meetings in sterile conference rooms. She held brainstorming walks in the park across the street. She encouraged her team to read poetry, to study history, to look for the human patterns hidden beneath the market data. Arthur watched all of this from a distance, fascinated and terrified in equal measure. He had unleashed a force of creative chaos into the heart of his perfectly ordered machine. His senior executives, men who lived and breathed spreadsheets, were deeply skeptical. What, precisely, is the ROI on brainstorming walks? One of them, a stern vice president named Wallace, had asked him in a meeting. "Innovation," Arthur had replied, the word sounding strange and new on his own tongue. Clara's first official project was to analyze the failure of a recent high-profile merger. The data team had produced a 100-page report filled with charts and graphs, but no real answers. Clara and her team spent a week not with the data, but with the people. They conducted quiet, informal interviews with the employees from the other company. Her report, when she presented it to the board, was 5 pages long. It contained no charts. It was a story. "The merger didn't fail because of incompatible financial models," she explained, her voice calm and clear. "It failed because of incompatible cultures. Their company was built on collaboration and trust. Ours was built on fear and efficiency. We didn't try to merge with them. We tried to conquer them, and they refused to be conquered." The room was silent. She had just diagnosed the core, unspoken problem of Arthur's entire leadership style. "The solution," she continued, "is not a better contract. It's building a better company, one where people are seen as partners, not just assets." After the meeting, Arthur found her staring out the window of her new office. "That was brutally honest," he said. "It was the truth," she replied, not looking at him. "That's what you hired me for, isn't it?" "I hired you to analyze data," he said. "People are data," she countered. "They're just the messy, unpredictable kind, the kind you can't fit into a spreadsheet." He found himself wanting to stay, to talk more, but he didn't know how. The old language of command and control was useless with her. And the new language of genuine connection was one he was still learning to speak. "Good work, Hayes," was all he managed before retreating to his own office. As Clara's influence grew, so did the resistance. The old guard of the company saw her as a threat to their established order. They subtly sabotaged her projects, losing her memos, scheduling conflicting meetings. It was a silent, corporate war of attrition. Clara was not naive. She saw it all. But she didn't fight them on their terms. She fought them with kindness and competence. When an executive tried to humiliate her in a meeting by asking a complex financial question she wouldn't know, she calmly replied, "That's an excellent question, Mark. My expertise is in the why, not the how much. But I'll have the answer for you by the end of the day." And she would, after spending hours in the library, teaching herself the concepts she didn't know. She was slowly, quietly winning. Arthur saw the war being waged, and a part of him, the old, ruthless part, wanted to step in and crush the opposition for her. But a newer, wiser part of him knew that she had to win this on her own. His protection would only delegitimize her. So he watched, a silent, anxious guardian, ready to intervene only if absolutely necessary. The real shift in their personal relationship happened not in the office, but because of it. One evening, Clara was working late, trying to finish a report. She was so engrossed in her work that she didn't realize everyone else had gone home. When she finally looked up, it was almost 10 p.m. The building was dark and silent. She packed her things and headed for the elevator, only to find it was shut down for maintenance. The emergency stairs were the only way out. 50 flights of dark, echoing concrete. She took a deep breath and started the long descent. Arthur had also been working late. He saw from his office window that her light was still on and felt a pang of concern. When he couldn't reach her on her office phone, a cold, unfamiliar feeling, fear, gripped him. He rushed out of his office and found the elevators were out of service. He didn't hesitate. He took the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the empty stairwell. He found her on the 23rd floor, sitting on the steps, her face pale, her breathing shallow. "Clara, are you okay?" he asked, rushing to her side. "I'm fine," she said, her voice weak. "Just a little dizzy. I haven't eaten since this morning." She tried to smile. "Looks like I forgot to factor basic human needs into my workflow." He looked at her, at the dark circles under her eyes that were becoming more prominent again, at the way she was pushing herself to the brink for his company, for the chance he had given her. And in that moment, she wasn't his director of analytics, or the waitress who had saved him. She was just Clara, a woman who was carrying too much on her own. Without a word, he sat down beside her on the cold concrete steps. He took off his expensive suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. "What are you doing?" she asked, surprised. "Being your colleague," he said simply. "And colleagues don't let each other get stuck in a dark stairwell alone." They sat in silence for a long time. There was no agenda, no pretense, just two people in a quiet, forgotten corner of a skyscraper. "You're working too hard," he said finally. "Look who's talking," she retorted, a little of her old spark returning. "I'm serious, Clara. You're trying to prove yourself to everyone, but you don't have to. You've already won." She leaned her head against the cold wall and sighed. "It's not about proving anything to them," she confessed. "It's about proving it to myself. Proving that the last few years, that they weren't a waste. That I'm still the person I was supposed to be." He understood. He, too, had spent his life trying to live up to an impossible standard. "For what it's worth," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "the person you are now is far more impressive than the person you think you were supposed to be." She turned to look at him, her eyes shining in the dim emergency lighting. The professional mask she wore had slipped, and he saw the vulnerable, tired but incredibly resilient woman underneath. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. His touch lingered for a fraction of a second too long. The air between them became charged, the quiet of the stairwell filled with the unspoken things that had been growing between them for weeks. The moment was broken by the sound of a maintenance worker's radio crackling to life on the floor below. They pulled apart, a flush rising on Clara's cheeks. The walk down the remaining 23 flights was silent, but it was a different kind of silence. It was a silence filled with a new, fragile, and terrifying possibility. When they reached the lobby, he insisted on driving her home. In the car, he didn't talk about work. He asked about her mother. He asked about her grandmother's stories. He asked about her. When they pulled up in front of her apartment building, he turned off the engine. "Clara," he began, his voice laced with an emotion he couldn't name. "Don't," she said softly, her hand on the door handle. "Don't say it yet." "Why?" "Because if you say it now, in the middle of all this, the new job, the company politics, I won't know if it's real," she said, her voice full of a painful honesty. "I need to know that you see me, just me, not the waitress, not the cipher, not the director who's making your company look good, just Clara." He nodded, understanding. "And how will you know?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'll know it when I feel it." She got out of the car and walked into her building without looking back. Arthur watched her go, a strange mix of frustration and profound respect in his heart. She wasn't just his brilliant analyst, she was his moral compass. And she was right. He had to be sure too. He had to be sure that what he felt wasn't just gratitude or admiration for her mind, but something deeper, something that had nothing to do with Pendleton Securities and everything to do with the woman who loved history and doodled on napkins and wasn't afraid to tell him he was wrong. The unspoken thing between them became a constant, humming presence in the office. It was in the way Arthur would find excuses to bring her coffee in the morning, just to have a few minutes of conversation that wasn't about work. It was in the way Clara would leave a book on his desk, a collection of poetry, a biography of a historical figure, with a simple note. Thought you might find this interesting. They were circling each other, two planets caught in a delicate gravitational pull, neither ready to admit they were on a collision course. The qualitative analytics department, once seen as Arthur's strange pet project, was now the most innovative hub in the company. Clara's team had a reputation for solving impossible problems. They had predicted a supply chain disruption in Southeast Asia based on an analysis of local folk music trends, which, as Clara explained, were a surprisingly accurate indicator of social unrest. They had revamped the company's entire marketing strategy for a new financial app by framing it not as an investment tool, but as a story of your future. It was unorthodox, and it was working. But success breeds enemies. Wallace, the stern vice president, and the other members of the old guard saw Clara's rise not as a victory for the company, but as a threat to their own power. They couldn't attack her work, which was undeniably brilliant, so they decided to attack her. The attack was subtle. A death by 1,000 paper cuts. A crucial file she needed for a presentation would go missing from the server. A meeting she was supposed to lead would be accidentally double-booked. They would use complex exclusionary jargon in board meetings, designed to make her feel like an outsider. Clara saw it all. She was no stranger to this kind of quiet professional bullying. She didn't complain to Arthur. She didn't let them see her sweat. She simply worked harder, stayed later, and met every challenge with a quiet, unshakable competence. When a file went missing, she had her own backup. When a meeting was double-booked, she calmly rescheduled. When they used jargon to exclude her, she would go home, spend all night researching the terms, and come back the next day, able to debate them with more fluency than they could. She refused to be made to feel small. Arthur saw the war being waged, and it infuriated him. He wanted to intervene, to fire Wallace and his cronies, to protect her with the full force of his authority. But Clara's words from the stairwell echoed in his mind. I need to know that you see me. Just me. If he fought her battles for her, he would be robbing her of her own victory. He would be proving that she needed his power to survive in his world, the very thing she was fighting to disprove. So, he did the hardest thing he had ever done. He stood back, trusted her, and waited. The breaking point came with the annual Pendleton Foundation charity auction. It was the biggest social event on the company's calendar, a night where the city's elite gathered to bid on extravagant items to raise money for various causes. This year, Clara's department had been asked to propose a new, innovative item for the auction. Clara's idea was radical. People don't want to just bid on another signed football or a weekend in Paris, she had argued in the planning meeting. They want to bid on an experience, something real. I propose we auction off a day of mentorship. The winner gets to spend a full day with one of our top executives, learning the ropes. The idea was met with blank stares. You want us to babysit an intern for a day? Wallace sneered. No, Clara said calmly. I want us to invest in the next generation. I want us to show that our most valuable asset isn't our stock portfolio, it's our knowledge. To everyone's surprise, Arthur had loved the idea. We'll do it, he had declared. And I'll be the first to offer a day of my time. The day with the CEO became the most buzzed-about item in the auction catalog. The night of the event, the ballroom was glittering. Clara was there, not as an employee, but as the architect of the evening's main event. She wore a simple, elegant black dress, looking every bit the part of a rising corporate star. The bidding for the day with Arthur was fierce. It quickly climbed into the tens of thousands of dollars. The final two bidders were a wealthy tech entrepreneur and a mysterious older woman in the back of the room who kept raising her paddle with a quiet, determined smile. In the end, the mysterious woman won, with a staggering bid of $50,000. As the crowd applauded, the woman walked to the stage. She was elegant, with kind eyes and a warm, genuine smile. Arthur stepped forward to shake her hand. Congratulations, he said. And may I ask your name? The woman smiled. My name is Rose Hayes, she said. And I'm Clara's grandmother. The room went completely silent. Clara, who was standing at the side of the stage, looked as if she had seen a ghost. Grandma? She whispered. What are you doing? Where did you get that kind of money? Rose just winked at her. Then she turned to the microphone. "I've been saving for a long time for a special occasion," she announced to the stunned crowd. "And I can't think of a more special occasion than investing in the future of the two people I admire most in the world." She looked from her granddaughter to Arthur. "I think you two have a lot to learn from each other. Now you have a whole day to do it. No interruptions." Arthur stood on the stage, completely floored. He had been outmaneuvered, not by a business rival, but by a retired seamstress with a mischievous smile and a deep love for her granddaughter. After the auction, in the chaotic aftermath of congratulations and confused whispers, Arthur finally found Clara and Rose near the coat check. "That was," he said, shaking his head in disbelief, "the most extraordinary thing I have ever seen." "I told you she was a force of nature," Clara said, hugging her grandmother. "But Grandma, $50,000, that's your life savings." "Nonsense," Rose said, patting her cheek. "Money is meant to be used for things that matter. And besides," she added, her eyes twinkling, "I have a good feeling about this investment. I think the returns are going to be excellent." She then looked at Arthur, her gaze direct and knowing. "You take good care of my girl, you hear me? She's a rare one." "I know," Arthur said, his voice full of a sincerity that was absolute. "I know she is." The day with the CEO was scheduled for the following Friday. It was the most talked-about event in the company. What would they do? Where would they go? Clara arrived at the office that morning, her heart a nervous flutter. She found Arthur not in his office, but waiting for her in the lobby. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was in casual slacks and a comfortable sweater. "Good morning, Director Hayes," he said with a smile. "Today you're the boss, I'm the student. Where are we going?" She laughed, the tension easing. "I have a few ideas," she said. She didn't take him to a boardroom or a business lunch. She took him on a tour of her world. Their first stop was the community college, where she had started her degree, where she introduced him to her old math professor. Their second stop was the public library, where she showed him the quiet corner in the cryptography section where she had spent countless hours teaching herself. Their third stop was a small, struggling soup kitchen where she volunteered on weekends. He watched as she moved through these spaces, not as a high-powered executive, but as Clara. He saw the respect she was given, the genuine affection she shared. He saw the world through her eyes, a world of quiet struggles, of small kindnesses, of resilient communities. It was a world that was a million miles away from Wall Street, and it was more real and more valuable than anything he had ever known. Their final stop was a small, unassuming diner, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and a jukebox in the corner. "Why are we here?" he asked. "This is where I came the day after my mother died," she said quietly. "I had $20 to my name. I bought a cup of coffee and a piece of pie, and I sat in that booth right there for 3 hours, trying to figure out how I was going to survive." She looked at him, her eyes shining. "I'm showing you this because I want you to see where I came from. All of it. The library and the soup kitchen, the struggle and the survival." He reached across the table and took her hand. The diner was noisy, the coffee was mediocre, but in that moment it felt like the most sacred place on earth. "Thank you for showing me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for seeing me," she replied. They sat there for a long time, their hands clasped on the checkered tablecloth. The mentor and the student, the boss and the employee. The labels had finally dissolved, leaving only two people, a man and a woman, who had found in each other's different worlds a shared sense of home. "So," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "After all this qualitative analysis, what's your conclusion?" She smiled back, her heart full. "My conclusion," she said, squeezing his hand, "is that this partnership shows extremely promising returns." The Friday of their mentorship day wasn't an ending, it was an ignition. The carefully constructed walls between their professional and personal lives had not just been breached, they had been cheerfully bulldozed and replaced with a foundation of genuine understanding. But building a house on that new foundation was a far more complicated and terrifying prospect. The following Monday at the office was a masterclass in exquisite awkwardness. They were acutely aware of each other in a way they hadn't been before. A simple, "good morning" in the hallway felt charged with the memory of shared stories in a noisy diner. A brief meeting to discuss a quarterly report was layered with the unspoken intimacy of hands clasped across a checkered tablecloth. They were trying to fall back into their roles as CEO and director, but the costumes no longer fit. The rest of the company noticed the shift immediately. The rumor mill, which had been temporarily silenced by Clara's undeniable competence, kicked back into high gear. The whispers were different now. They were less about her qualifications and more about the nature of her relationship with the boss. Wallace and his faction of old guard executives watched them like hawks, looking for any sign of unprofessionalism, any crack in the armor they could exploit. Clara felt the pressure keenly. She had fought so hard to be respected for her mind, for her work. Now she feared she would be reduced to the one label she had always dreaded, the boss's girlfriend. To compensate, she threw herself even more deeply into her work. She became more professional, more focused, almost clinical in her interactions with Arthur in public. She created a deliberate, professional distance, a buffer zone to protect her hard-won credibility. Arthur, for his part, was completely lost. He was a man who understood numbers, strategies, and clear, defined outcomes. He did not understand the subtle, nuanced dance of an office romance, especially one that had started with a public humiliation and a cryptographic cipher. He saw the distance Clara was creating and misinterpreted it. He thought she was pulling away, regretting the vulnerability she had shown him. His old insecurities, the ones that whispered he was unlovable, that people always left, began to surface. He reverted to what he knew, formal, professional communication. The result was a painful, silent stalemate. They would pass each other in the hall, exchange polite, professional nods, and retreat to their separate offices, both of them miserable and too afraid to make the first move. The person who finally broke the deadlock was, unsurprisingly, Rose Hayes. She showed up at Pendleton Securities one afternoon, unannounced, carrying a large Tupperware container that smelled suspiciously of her famous empanadas. She bypassed the stunned receptionist and marched directly to the 50th floor. "I'm here to see my granddaughter," she announced to Arthur's startled assistant, and the foolish man who was making her miserable. She found Clara in her office, staring at a spreadsheet with unseeing eyes. "You look terrible, Mia," Rose said bluntly, placing the container on her desk. "You have the look of a woman who is trying to solve a heart problem with her head. It doesn't work. Trust me, I've tried." Before Clara could respond, Rose walked out of her office and into Arthur's. He looked up from his work, completely taken aback. "Mrs. Hayes," he stammered. "Rose." "Arthur Pendleton," she said, sitting in the chair opposite him without being invited. "We need to talk. You are a very smart man. You can build empires, you can predict markets, but you are a complete idiot when it comes to women." Arthur was so shocked he couldn't even form a sentence. "You have a diamond," Rose continued, her voice firm but not unkind. "A rare, brilliant, one-of-a-kind diamond, and you are keeping it locked in a safe, only looking at it through the keyhole, because you are afraid someone will tell you it's just a piece of glass. You are afraid to believe it's real." She leaned forward. "Let me tell you something. That girl in the next office, she is more real than anything in this entire building. But she is also scared. She has been treated like glass her whole life, told she was fragile and easily broken. If you want her, you cannot wait for her to come to you. You have to be the one to show her that you know, without a doubt, that she is a diamond." She stood up. "The empanadas are for both of you," she said, gesturing towards Clara's office. "Eat them together, and for God's sake, talk to each other. Life is too short for foolish pride." She walked out, leaving a trail of wisdom and the faint scent of baked goods in her wake. Arthur sat in his office for a long time, Rose's words echoing in his mind. You have to be the one to show her that you know, without a doubt, that she is a diamond. He finally understood. His fear of being hurt, his habit of keeping a professional distance, he was sending her the wrong signals. He was confirming her deepest fear, that in the end, she was just a temporary project, not a permanent part of his life. He stood up, walked out of his office, and strode directly into hers. She was sitting at her desk, staring at the Tupperware container as if it contained a ticking bomb. "Close your laptop," he said, his voice firm, but with a new warmth she hadn't heard before. "What? Why?" Because my future mother-in-law told me to feed you empanadas and talk to you, he said. And frankly, I'm more terrified of her than I am of my entire board of directors. She looked at him, surprised, and then a small, genuine laugh escaped her. It was the first time they had truly laughed together in over a week. He pulled a chair up to her desk, opened the container, and handed her an empanada. We're being idiots, he said. Complete and utter idiots, she agreed, taking a bite. The familiar taste of her grandmother's cooking was a comforting balm. I've been pulling away because I was afraid, he confessed. Afraid that this was too good to be true. Afraid that I would mess it up. I've been pulling away because I was afraid you'd change your mind, she admitted. Afraid that the CEO would eventually win out over the man who eats mac and cheese. The CEO is an idiot, he said. The man who eats mac and cheese is hopelessly in love with you. The words were simple, direct, and utterly real. Clara felt the last of her defensive walls crumble. I'm in love with him too, she whispered. He reached across the desk and took her hand. So, what do we do? Director Hayes? What's the strategic solution for two idiots in love who work in the same office? She smiled, her eyes shining. I think, she said, squeezing his hand, that the solution is to stop having meetings and start having dinner. A real one. Tonight. And you're paying. Deal, he said, his heart feeling lighter than it had in years. But you're choosing the restaurant. My taste is clearly questionable. Their relationship, once it was finally acknowledged, blossomed with a surprising, joyful speed. They were no longer hiding. They had dinner together, almost every night. He would help her with her research for her community projects. She would help him write speeches that sounded less like a robot and more like a human being. He took her to the opera. She took him to a loud, chaotic street fair. He was horrified by the fried dough. She was bored by the areas. They discovered they had almost nothing in common, and it was perfect. They didn't fit together. They challenged each other, complemented each other, and in doing so, created a new, more interesting whole. The office, of course, was a minefield. Wallace and his cronies were watching their every move. The whispers grew more pointed. Arthur knew he had to address the situation, not just for Clara, but for the entire company. He called a company-wide town hall meeting. He stood in front of his employees, not behind a podium, but on the same level as them. Clara was in the front row, a silent, supportive presence. I know there has been a great deal of speculation recently, he began, his voice clear and steady, and I am here to be completely transparent. Clara Hayes is an invaluable asset to this company. She is the most innovative mind I have ever worked with, and she is also the woman I love. A collective gasp went through the room. I understand that this is an unconventional situation, he continued, and I understand that it raises questions about professionalism and fairness. That is why I have asked the board to initiate a formal review, led by an independent third party, to create a new, clear policy on inter-office relationships for all employees, including myself. But I want to be clear about one thing. My personal relationship with Miss Hayes will not and has not influenced her professional standing. She has earned her position and every bit of respect that comes with it, on her own merit. Anyone who suggests otherwise is not just questioning her integrity, they are questioning my own. He looked directly at Wallace as he said it. The message was unmistakable. The war was over. After the meeting, the atmosphere in the company changed. The whispers died down, replaced by a grudging respect. Arthur had not hidden. He had faced the issue head-on, with honesty and integrity. He had protected Clara, not by shielding her, but by publicly affirming her value. That evening, he took her to the small park where they had first had a real conversation, the day after her grandmother had been hospitalized. You were amazing today, she said, as they sat on their usual bench. I was just telling the truth, he said. He then turned to her, a serious expression on his face. Clara, I know this is fast. I know we're still figuring things out. But I have also learned that when you know something is right, you don't wait. You don't analyze it to death, you act. He took a small velvet box from his pocket. My grandmother, he said, his voice a little shaky, was a seamstress. She wasn't wealthy, but she had a talent for making beautiful things out of simple materials. This was hers. He opened the box. Inside was not a diamond, but a simple, elegant ring, a thin band of gold with a tiny, perfect pearl. She told my mother that a pearl is not like a diamond, which is hard and brilliant from the start, he said. A pearl starts as a piece of grit and irritation, and it only becomes beautiful through time, patience, and layers of care. He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. That's what our love feels like to me. It started with irritation, with a challenge, with grit, but it has become something beautiful, something real. He took her hand. Clara Hayes, he said, his voice full of an emotion he no longer tried to hide. You are the pearl of my life. Will you marry me? She was crying, silent, happy tears streaming down her face. You and my grandmother, she whispered, both with the perfect words. Is that a yes? He asked, his own eyes misty. Yes, she said, laughing through her tears. Of course it's a yes, you foolish, wonderful man. He slid the ring onto her finger, and it was a perfect fit. The news of their engagement spread through Pendleton Securities with the speed of a stock market crash. But the result was the exact opposite. The company, which had been holding its collective breath, let out a sigh of relief. The announcement wasn't a scandal, it was a resolution. It transformed the narrative from one of potential corporate impropriety to a genuine, albeit unconventional, love story. Arthur and Clara weren't just the CEO and the director anymore. They were a team, a power couple, and the employees, who had grown to love Clara and respect the new Arthur, were overwhelmingly supportive. Wallace and his cronies, seeing the tide had turned irrevocably against them, fell silent. Some quietly resigned, unable to adapt to the new, more human-centric culture. Others, surprisingly, began to change, inspired by the shift they had witnessed. The Clara effect, as it came to be known internally, was real. Productivity was up, but more importantly, morale had never been higher. People started sharing ideas more freely, collaborating across departments, and bringing donuts to meetings. The company was becoming less like a machine and more like a community. Planning the wedding became their next project, and they approached it like everything else, as a partnership. Arthur, with his logistical genius, handled the contracts and the vendors. Clara, with her storyteller's heart, handled the vision. No, she said firmly, when Arthur's event planner presented them with a proposal for a lavish, 1,000-person affair at the city's most exclusive hotel. This isn't us. Our story isn't about grand ballrooms and ice sculptures. It's about diners and libraries and stairwells. So, they fired the planner and designed the wedding themselves. They chose a venue that was a perfect fusion of their two worlds, the city's historical library, a magnificent old building with soaring ceilings, quiet reading nooks, and a grand, sunlit atrium. It's the perfect place, Clara had said, her eyes shining as she looked around. A place where stories and knowledge are treasured above all else. The guest list was a carefully curated mix of their lives. Her grandmother, Rose, was the guest of honor, holding court in a comfortable armchair and telling embarrassing stories about Clara's childhood to anyone who would listen. Her team from the qualitative analytics department was there, alongside the loyal executives from Pendleton Securities who had embraced the new vision. Even a few of the regulars from the Sunnyside Cafe were invited, much to the confusion of Arthur's wealthy relatives. The wedding day itself was a masterpiece of beautiful, authentic chaos. Clara didn't wear a designer gown. She wore a simple, elegant dress made of vintage lace that she and her grandmother had found in a dusty antique shop and restored together. She walked down the aisle not on the arm of a relative, but alone, a symbol of the independent woman she had always been. Her path lined not with roses, but with towering shelves of books. Arthur waited for her at the front of the atrium, his face a picture of pure, unadulterated adoration. He had never looked more at peace. Their vows, spoken in the quiet, reverent atmosphere of the library, were a testament to their journey. Clara, Arthur began, his voice steady but full of emotion. You walked into my life and deciphered the most complex code I have ever known, my own heart. You saw past the cold, hard data of who I was pretending to be, and you found the man I had forgotten how to be. I used to believe that love was a liability, an unpredictable variable that could only lead to loss. You have taught me that love is the only investment with a guaranteed infinite return. I promise to spend the rest of my life being your student, your partner, and your greatest champion. I promise to always listen to the story, especially when it's hard to hear. Clara, her eyes shining with tears, responded in kind. "Arthur," she said, her voice soft but clear, "you saw me when I was invisible. You gave me a chance when the world had given me none. But more than that, you had the courage to let me change you. You let me mess up your perfect, orderly world, and in the chaos, we found something beautiful. I used to believe that my life was a series of closed doors. You didn't just open a door for me. You built a whole new house with me. I promised to fill that house with laughter, with stories, and with a love that is as real and as resilient as we are." When they were pronounced husband and wife, the library, a place of traditional silence, erupted in joyful applause. Their first kiss was sweet and deep, and full of the promise of a lifetime of shared chapters. The reception was not a formal, sit-down dinner. It was a celebration. There was a jazz trio playing in one corner, a nod to Arthur's grandfather, a salsa band in another, a nod to Clara's love of dance. The food was served from food trucks parked outside, featuring everything from gourmet sliders to her grandmother's famous empanadas. The highlight of the evening was the wedding cake. It was a magnificent, multi-tiered creation designed by Clara herself. Each layer represented a different part of their story, decorated with edible symbols, a tiny, perfect cipher, a miniature waitress's notepad, a pair of pearl earrings, and on the very top, two figures, one in a suit and one in a simple dress, sitting on a concrete step in a stairwell. Later that evening, as the party swirled around them, Arthur pulled Clara onto a quiet balcony that overlooked the city. "Happy, Mrs. Pendleton?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her. "Beyond happy," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "But you know, I'm thinking of keeping my own name, professionally at least. Hayes Analytics has a nice ring to it." He laughed. "I wouldn't expect anything less. But you're stuck with Mrs. Pendleton for the really important stuff." "Like what?" "Like being the co-chair of the new Pendleton Hayes Foundation," he said. She looked up at him, surprised. "The what?" "I've been thinking," he said, his expression turning serious. "All of this, my company, my wealth, it doesn't mean anything if it's not doing some good in the world. You taught me that. So I'm restructuring. Pendleton Securities will continue to be a financial firm, but a significant portion of its profits will now go directly into our new foundation." "Our foundation?" "Yes, ours," he confirmed. "Its mission will be to fund educational opportunities for people who have been overlooked, people with brilliant minds who never got the chance to finish their degrees, people like you. And I want you to run it. You will have a blank check and complete autonomy to build it from the ground up." Clara was speechless. It was the most incredible, thoughtful, and profound gift he could have ever given her. It wasn't just a job. It was a purpose, a shared legacy. "Arthur," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't know what to say." "Just say yes," he said, his eyes full of love. "Say you'll be my partner in this too." "Yes," she said, her heart full to bursting. 1,000 times yes. They sealed their new partnership with a kiss, high above the glittering city. Their love story hadn't just changed their own lives. It was about to change countless others. Their life together was a beautiful, chaotic, and incredibly productive symphony. The Pendleton Hayes Foundation became a powerful force for good, identifying and supporting hundreds of Claras across the country. Brilliant, resilient individuals who had been dealt a bad hand by life. Clara, with her unique ability to see the potential in everyone, was a natural leader, creating programs that were not just charitable, but truly empowering. Arthur, for his part, found a new joy in his work. He was still a brilliant CEO, but his motivation had shifted. He was no longer driven by the cold pursuit of profit, but by the desire to build a company that was not just successful, but significant. He became a mentor to the young people in their foundation's programs, sharing his knowledge not as a titan of industry, but as someone who understood the value of a second chance. They built a home in the country, a warm, sprawling house with a big, messy garden, and a library so large it needed its own card catalog, which Clara happily created. Rose came to live with them, filling their home with the smell of empanadas and the sound of her wise, joyful laughter. About a year after their wedding, Clara was in the garden, trying to teach Arthur the difference between a weed and a perennial, when she suddenly felt a wave of dizziness. "Are you all right?" he asked, rushing to her side. She smiled, a slow, secret smile. "I'm better than all right. she said, taking his hand and placing it on her belly. "I think our foundation is about to have its first and most important scholarship recipient." He stared at her, then at her hand, his mind for once slow to process the data. And then his eyes widened with a dawning, incredulous joy. Are we?" he stammered. "Yes," she said, laughing. "We are." He lifted her up and spun her around, his own laughter echoing through the garden, a sound of pure, unadulterated happiness. The man who had once built a fortress around his heart was now about to build a family. Their story was not a fairy tale. It was better. It was a real, messy, complicated, and beautiful story of two people who had found in each other not a solution to their problems, but a partner with whom to face them. It was a story of redemption, of second chances, and of a love that was strong enough to not just heal two broken hearts, but to make the world a slightly better and much more interesting place. 9 months later, the quiet, warm house in the countryside was filled with a new, beautiful kind of chaos. Arthur Pendleton II was born on a sunny Tuesday morning, a tiny, perfect baby with his father's intense blue eyes and a shock of dark hair that hinted at his mother's rebellious spirit. Arthur held his son for the first time, his large, capable hands looking impossibly clumsy as they cradled the small, sleeping infant. He looked at Clara, who was exhausted but radiant in her hospital bed, and felt a wave of love so profound it was almost painful. All the mergers, all the acquisitions, all the billions of dollars he had ever managed, they were nothing compared to this. This tiny, breathing miracle. This was real wealth. Life with a newborn was a humbling, sleep-deprived, and utterly joyful adventure. Arthur, the man who once ran his life on a to-the-minute schedule, now found his days dictated by feeding times and diaper changes. He learned to function on 3 hours of sleep. He became an expert at assembling complicated baby swings. He discovered that the most soothing sound in the world was not a quiet, empty house, but the soft, milky sighs of his son sleeping on his chest. Clara, in turn, blossomed into motherhood with a natural grace that amazed him. She was patient, intuitive, and seemed to have an endless well of love and energy. She would sing old Spanish lullabies to the baby, her voice soft and sweet, and Arthur would find himself stopping in the doorway just to listen, his heart full. Their home became a haven. Rose, now a doting great-grandmother, was a constant, joyful presence, filling the house with the scent of her cooking and spoiling her great-grandson with handmade blankets and endless cuddles. They were a family, a loud, messy, imperfect, and incredibly happy one. The Pendleton Hayes Foundation, under the guidance of a board they now fully trusted, continued to thrive. It became a national model for effective, empowering philanthropy. Clara, even while on maternity leave, remained its guiding spirit. She would join board meetings via video call, often with a sleeping baby nestled in a carrier on her chest, her insights as sharp and as compassionate as ever. Arthur found a new balance in his own life. He still ran his firm, but he did it differently. He delegated more, trusted his team, and made a point of leaving the office at 5 o'clock every single day. His employees, in turn, were more loyal and more innovative than ever before. The Clara effect had become a permanent part of the company's DNA. When their son, whom they called Artie, was a year old, they took him on his first trip to the Sunnyside Cafe. The place was the same checkered tablecloths, the same friendly barista, the same smell of coffee and jam. "This is where it all started," Arthur said, bouncing a giggling Artie on his knee. "Right here, at this table, where a very smart woman decided to give a very foolish man a second chance." Clara smiled, reaching across the table to take his hand. "I think," she said, her eyes twinkling, "that a very smart man had the courage to admit he was a fool. That's a much rarer story." They became regulars at the cafe, their own small family adding a new chapter to the place's long history. One evening, a few years later, they were in the grand reading room of the historical library, the place where they had been married. The library was hosting the first ever Pendleton Hayes Scholars Gala, an event celebrating the first graduating class of students who had been supported by their foundation. The room was filled with bright, hopeful young faces, men and women from all walks of life who, like Clara, had been given a chance to pursue their dreams. Clara was on stage, giving the keynote address. She was no longer the hesitant, invisible waitress. She was a confident, eloquent leader. her words inspiring a new generation. Arthur stood in the back of the room with a 5-year-old Artie, watching his wife with a look of pure, unadulterated pride. "That's your mom," he whispered to his son. "She's a superhero." "I know," Artie whispered back, his eyes glued to the stage. "She makes the best pancakes, too." After the speech, as Clara was surrounded by a crowd of well-wishers, an older woman with a familiar, mischievous smile made her way through the crowd. It was the photographer from the cafe, the one who had called them a lovely couple all those years ago. "I knew it," the woman said, her eyes twinkling as she looked from Clara to Arthur. "I told you I could spot a real love story. I'm a professional." She then looked at Artie. "And it looks like you've produced a beautiful sequel." Clara and Arthur laughed, a shared, easy sound. Later that night, after they had tucked Artie into bed, they sat together on the porch of their country home, looking up at the star-filled sky. "Do you ever think about it?" Clara asked, snuggling into his side. "How different everything would be if I hadn't paid for your bus fare that day." He was quiet for a moment, then he turned to her, his expression serious. "No," he said. "No," she asked, surprised. "No," he repeated, pulling her closer, "because I don't believe it was an accident. A world where I don't meet you, where I don't have you and Artie, that world doesn't make any sense. It's an illogical data point. It couldn't exist." He smiled, tracing the line of her cheek with his thumb. "Somehow, in some way, I would have found you, even if I had to decipher every code in the world to do it." She smiled, her heart full. "You're a hopeless romantic, Arthur Pendleton." "Only for you, Clara Hayes," he whispered, before kissing her under the vast, quiet, and infinitely hopeful night sky. Their story had started with a simple act of kindness, a transaction of a few coins on a city bus. But it had become a testament to the fact that the greatest returns in life are not found on a balance sheet, but in the immeasurable, priceless wealth of a love that is brave enough to see past the surface and invest in the heart. What did you think of the story of Arthur and Clara? On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate their journey to love? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for everyone who has stayed with us to the end, who believes in the power of a second chance and the wisdom of grandmothers, please comment with a simple diamond. We are so grateful to share these stories with you. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more narratives that will warm your soul.